Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Future of Telemedicine Zoom panel event. Proclinical are honoured to be hosting this event. This is the second in a three-part series on the future of digital health. We felt it would add value to the life sciences community to be talking about the future of telemedicine during these changing times, as well as to provide an opportunity for you to network and connect with other life sciences professionals. So just to do some introductions, my name is Claire Perry. I specialize in recruiting for medical device and life sciences companies across the US. I have a pre-med from the University of Technology, Sydney, and I've recruited executives all over the world. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Lewis Rooney. Lewis is helping us on the back end today. Lewis has spent the last 2 years with me in our San Francisco office, building out our digital health offering. So doing a lot of recruitment within that space here on the West Coast, and now expanding that offering to our New York and London offices. To introduce Proclinical, we're global growth partners to the life sciences industry. We're solely focused on that space. We're headquartered out of London, England, and have offices in the US, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Our San Francisco office, where myself and Lewis are located, do a lot of work in the digital health space, and we specialize in placing STEM talent from individual contributor all the way through to C-suite and board member placements through our executive search brand. I'd like to introduce our special guest today. We're honored to have Osman Khawar. Osman is the CEO of Diality, which is a state-of-the-art startup home dialysis company located in Southern California. We have Sanjeev Saxena. Sanjeev is the vice chairman of the board of directors of Texas Tech Research Park, and he's a CEO of DXME and the founder of POC Medical. We also have Hasnain Somji. Hasnain is the director of marketing and digital health at Vyaire Medical. He was previously at Halyard Health, 3M, and Medtronic. I'm going to hand over to our panelists so they can tell you a little bit more about themselves. Let's start with Osman.
Thanks, Claire, and welcome everyone. Hopefully you have a great discussion today. My name is Osman Khawar. I'm the CEO of Diality. We're a startup in the Southern California area, as Claire said, and we're developing a state-of-the-art home dialysis machine and trying to take what's currently a in-center experience for patients to the home environment. I'm originally a board-certified nephrologist, and Diality is probably about 6 months away from submission to the agency. We're really excited about taking a device to the home environment, but also about getting involved in the telehealth side. So thank you for your invitation, and hopefully we can have some great discussions today with Somji and Hasnain.
Thanks, Osman. Sanjeev.
Thank you for having me here, Claire, and thanks to everyone for joining. My name is Sanjeev Saxena. I'm the founder of DXME and also the vice chairman of Texas Tech University Research Park. Prior to this, I was the founder of a company called POC Medical Systems. POC developed the first breast cancer test using as a point-of-care system, marketing in rural communities in India and China and Africa. Done a number of startups. DXME is another startup which is in the telehealth space, and I'm glad to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Hasnain.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity, Claire and Lewis, bringing us here. I think it will be a wonderful discussion talking about telemedicine. My role here at Vyaire Medical is mainly in the product management and marketing in the digital space. And I also have a smaller team in supply chain management. Vyaire Medical is a leader in respiratory care, IoT, predictive analytics, and other portfolio within the digital health. Prior to here, coming to Vyaire, I was with Hallett Health running their innovations program in artificial intelligence, and before that, quite a long time at Medtronic at 3M in the pharma, as well as in clinical data management and CareLink systems as well. So happy to be here and share some of my insights and learn as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Hasnain. So this is the landscape of telemedicine. Many of the companies that are in digital health, telehealth, and telemedicine. We felt it was important to give a definition of telemedicine, just because there is a fair bit of ambiguity around the word. So what is telemedicine? Telemedicine refers to the practice of caring for patients remotely when the provider and patient are not physically present with each other. The terms telemedicine and telehealth bring with them plenty of debate among individuals in the healthcare field. One reason for the debate is due to the varying definitions pertaining to the terms themselves. Experts consider telemedicine to be physician-focused and telehealth to include all health professionals in general. Okay, so we have some questions for our panelists, so we're just going to dive right in and get started. So the first question is, there is a lot of history in telemedicine and telehealth. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of telemedicine? Hasnain, can we start with you on this one?
Sure. So I think the creation of telemedicine back in the 1800s, the inception of telecommunications infrastructure, which included the telegraph, telephone, and radio. Back in the Civil War, the casualties and injuries were reported using the telegraph technology at that time in the Civil War area. As we look in the 1900s and 1905, the first transfer of EKG electronically happened by William Einthoven. In 1948, the first, I think, radiology images were sent over the phone between two medical staff and some, I forgot the location, the academic location, but somewhere in Pennsylvania. Fast forward to 1950s and 60s. In 1959, a physician at University of Nebraska, they transmitted a neurological examination across the campus between two students. And that was the first instance of two-way interactive television or the imaging in this time. Interestingly, I was doing some research on the history of telemedicine and found out that the Gemini and the Apollo programs with NASA also started with the telemedicine when they were monitoring the health of astronauts in space, and that happened in 1960s. So we fast forward in the 90s, the telemedicine concept, telehealth concept took the next level of maturity, and it was widely spread acceptance in the teleradiology area. We saw a lot of the offshore work being going on from here to different countries where you can examine different things. And I think it was primarily happened because the infrastructure of the internet that happened to the next level. Take it to where we are today in 2020, telemedicine is expected to be a $35 billion industry, and its imperative piece is the modern healthcare delivery that we have today. And the objective that we learned from other panelists today is to help reduce the cost and to improve the efficiency. And you'll probably hear this over and over again. So that's what I would come up with a very summary of the history of telemedicine.
Yeah, Hasnain, I think I was also interested to see how it had varied throughout the globe, Hasnain, how places like Australia with a big rural population had really been pioneers in some of this. And in the United States, it's obviously just been, as you said, teleradiology, some teledermatology, but now we're really seeing a really big change, as you mentioned.
Limited telemedicine hasn't really come to mainstream because of the infrastructure not being, existent up till now. But with technology advancing and internet, as you said, Hassan, it is now starting to catch on, and and especially with COVID right now, I think it's taken a leapfrog. Otherwise, it would have taken a lot longer. So
Yeah,
telemedicine is in.
agree. Yeah.
Thanks, Sanjeev. And talking about COVID, how has COVID put more restraints or fast forwarded telemedicine, and what is the impact on the industry as a whole? What was it like, pre-COVID and versus now? Osman, can you talk a little bit about this?
Osman, we can't hear you. No. We
I
lost
think
your
Osman's
voice.
lost sound. Osman, do you want to try muting and then unmuting yourself just in case?
He's mute already. Claire,
Still can't hear you.
or Lois, can you unmute him? He's muted.
Try now, Osman.
No.
Maybe we can come back to Osman on this question. I'm sure the sound will come back. It's a little bit glitchy, maybe. We'll come back to you, Osman. Did anybody else, want to jump in on this question? And then hopefully we'll have Osman's sorted out. Oh, Osman, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I think you're asking about pre and post COVID. And I think, as Hasnain mentioned, it was about a $30 billion market and thought to become something like 50, 55 is what I was reading by 2025. But now I think we all know that that's probably fairly conservative. In pre-COVID, I think most of the work was being done on the patient interaction. And if you look at CMS data, 99% pre-COVID of interactions are being done in person. And we all know that there's been a rapid transformation now in that data, and vast majority of offices are doing a lot more virtual visits. I also think that before we were concentrated really on chronic conditions, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, and monitoring those. And also, I think, concentrating more on inpatient spaces and how to get some of the data out of those or other spaces. I think now what we're looking at in medical device space is how to take that development accelerated because of COVID, and how can we take medical care to the home environment specifically and outside of these sort of medical industrial complex. And I think COVID-19 has really fast forwarded that dramatically. For example, the dialysis market, 90% of dialysis is being done, in a dialysis center, and now there's huge drives even prior to COVID to get people to a home environment in a safe way. And so COVID has really fast forwarded the drive for that. And as I look at interest from people funding companies, but also development that's going on with other startups in the area, I think everyone is really interested in how to accelerate the telemedicine piece and what their product should be doing to be playing in this space in the next environment. I think very few people on the product side are not thinking about this. It's really part and parcel of your development now.
Thanks, Osman. And Osman, have you seen any restraints as a result of COVID?
I was initially worried when this happened about getting some of the development personnel available, because everyone was rushing towards doing this, but that hasn't really panned out. We've had success in that space, but I'm sure as everyone tries to get involved in the telemedicine space, there may be some development issues as people don't have enough software engineers, etc. I also think that the reimbursement is not entirely clear in all these spaces. And so as you put development dollars towards some of this, you have to be thinking about those challenges. Are you going to recoup some of these dollars in the development that you put in as well? I think on the physician interaction, there was quick moves from emergency funding. But if we think about a dialysis machine or a ventilator, bringing development dollars into remote monitoring, how do they really get reimbursed for that? I think that is a challenge that we all have to look at. As we think about payers and how they're going to think about this, I think there are challenges there that we'd like to standardize and overcome.
Are there any different CMS reimbursement models for from state to state? Is that vary, Osman, in your space?
There is on the global reimbursement for dialysis, there isn't. On the physician interaction, there isn't. But there are some variations on reimbursement for home hemodialysis, not related to telemedicine. But that does, I think, give you a sense that all the MACs think about dialysis in the home environment a little bit differently. There's been some movements to try and standardize that. And so that's been good. As you think about dialysis, for example, in the home environment, if there's machinery that is better at remote monitoring or better at capturing data, right now there's no reimbursement for that. There's no added payment because it's a bundled environment. And so, you know, I think the device space is looking closely at this, but also trying to figure out how do we get reimbursed for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Osman. Thanks, Hasnain. You know, it sounds like there has been a lot of changes as a result of COVID. And do we think that things, you know, may go back to normal? Sanjeev, did you want to talk about this?
Sure. That's a very good question. I think the big issue that we have with, you know, with what is normal, things have been changing all along, and COVID has just moved it really fast. That, you know, a lot of older people, you had physicians visiting older people at their homes, etc., or you know, the nursing staff. But with COVID, you're starting to see technology coming in that people are starting to utilize technology. Even as an example, my mom, who would always go to the doctor, now we are having the inpatient visits done on video phones, right? But the problem is you don't have the physical interaction with the physician, which is as important. But as people get used to it, I think it's going to stay, and especially with the younger generation, they are more likely to stay with the new normal, whereas the older generation would want to go back to the way things were done. But I think it's just the same way as if you look at shopping. At one time, everyone wanted to go to the malls. Today, it's Amazon, right? And you know, back in early 2000, when the .com started, nobody wanted to do online shopping. Today, everyone does that. So it's the same thing out here. I think with COVID, it's just brought that to light that you can do it this way. Now, the issue is going to be the reimbursements and the regulatory environments around that. So if that can be caught up quick enough, then things will continue as it is. Otherwise, it may slightly slack off for a little bit. But it's there to stay. It's not going to go back completely to the way it was.
I'd agree with what you're saying there, Sanjeev. I think it's a new normal, and I think we're all thinking about this. And really, as the youth look for greater accessibility in a physician interaction or for their medical care, you know, this is one way telemedicine can overcome that and overcome the barriers that were in the brick and mortar, just like Amazon has done. So I think telemedicine will do that for these interactions as well.
Well, see, one of the reasons you went in the past is you had your blood pressure taken. The physician would take that, they'd check your heart rate. Today, you know, even you can get these digital stethoscopes on Amazon. You can check that and tell the physician what's going on. So as these tools become real, right, there's no reason for you to have to run out there. And for the physicians, also, it's better because rather than spending, you know, a lot of time with the patient and recording all the information. They're getting everything digitally, right? And you don't have to sit down and record it. You can have a recorder recording the whole thing, right? And so it increases efficiency as well. I think this is the new normal and it's going to stay. Hassan, what do you think?
I think during this pandemic and COVID, even in our part of the business in respiratory, reaching out to the patients with COPDs and reaching out to clinicians for cross-training, we have to come up with newer models to replicate what they see in their environment, in our labs, in our testing environment, to replicate this and provide them the same guidance that we used to go and show them different parameters that you change in the ventilator. And now it's a completely different way of thinking and interacting with the clinicians as well.
Think about it this way, Claire. You know, right until COVID hit, all conferences were in person, right? You rarely ever had Zoom, and Zoom really took off because of COVID. Otherwise, it wasn't. There was the WebEx meetings which happened, but it was far and few in between. But now we have learned that you don't really need to travel distances. You can do it online, right? The same thing the medical community is learning. We at DXME, we are developing an app where you can literally go in, and it's going to take time, but you know, you have all the data, and the app will be able to tell you potentially what's going on, and the physician sitting far away can look at that information along with all the data and confirm what to do next, right? So the new normal is going to be changing even more dramatically as we go along in the next few years.
Yeah, I think what I really look forward to is a time where things are a bit more standardized and integrated, because we do have these IoT and wearables, and being able to be in a space where the physician can capture information from different wearables, but on a singular platform, integrate them into their EHRs, really capture that data in a meaningful way.
Yep.
I think we're still in the place where it's not a meaningful capture, and it has to be reintegrated on the physician side or the provider side. And I think that that's really the next level that I'm excited about, because when we can really do that, then it becomes a lot more meaningful in that interaction, and that data capture is easier to use.
Yeah. And that was the beginning back when I was going to school 10, 15 years ago, when we were talking about basic devices doing the connectivity and talking. That's why the whole concept of IHE, the integrated health exchange, came in, and you're making sure that everybody's using the same HL7 languages. This issue about telemedicine and with COVID and different devices, especially the smart devices, have exponentially shown a bigger issue and how to integrate them into a single platform, right?
I think the other exciting space also is people with chronic conditions. For me, of course, chronic kidney disease or ESRD, but someone with advanced COPD. But not only as a medical device monitoring while you're on the machine, I think is your bread and butter. But how do we take that and monitor the patient now when they're not on their CPAP machine or the dialysis machine? And how do we optimize health using remote monitoring and wearables? And that level too of capturing that data, using that same platform of integrating that data and really alerting, monitoring, and capturing important data that's significant, that's actionable. I think that off-device monitoring is another exciting space that we would all get to as well.
Agree. Good point.
Thanks, everyone. Yep. And then, I mean, just going off the back of that, it sounds like that may be one of the trends that we're seeing in telemedicine. What other trends are you guys seeing in telemedicine post-COVID-19 as seen?
I think some of them have been in place before COVID-19, but as Sanjeev said, has exponentially increases the adoption. So in my mind, I think about the six trends that I think about. The first one is the skyrocketing adoption, and it's primarily because the current pandemic, the cost savings potential, increased productivity, and better work-life balance, both from the provider side as well as from the patient perspective. All of them have accelerated the adoption. If you see their retail clinics at Walmart, at CVS and Walgreens, they already offer telehealth services to satisfy patient needs. So in turn, it puts a lot of pressure on larger health systems like the Trinity and HCA and Providence and Kaiser to respond to these pressure and increase their revenue potential. So that's number one. Number two, expanding your direct-to-customer model. So what I mean by that is telemedicine or this whole mHealth concept. Once upon a time was you have an app, a cool app, you pick up the app, you press the button, and it connects you with the doctor that you don't know of, you don't have a relationship on. And that model has changed. It's companies like Vyaire, Lumosity, WebMD, Amazon, they've branched from the traditional face-to-face conversation about I've had a rash or I have a cough into more delivery of prescriptions and also use of home-held medical devices. And they're using digital assistants like the Google Home and Alexa to start managing the chronic diseases like the heart failure and COPD. So we expect to see these more models of the DTC models or the direct-to-consumer models become more complex as more and more partners coming in, but also they're valuable. So that's number two models. Number three is what I see is the vertical growth. What I mean by this is more and more hospitals are taking these telemedicine applications, platforms. They are demanding vendors like us to provide more features, more capabilities to address the sophisticated clinical needs. So in my world, we have to provide our connectivity devices, IoT devices behind the ventilators. We need to provide better remote monitoring tools to support the PPE in this pandemic. And we need to provide better artificial intelligence applications that translates your normal data into insights and predict outcome. So that's number three. Hospital to home is also a new trend that you start to see to reduce the readmission and taking more of the clinical activities taken to home and making sure the patient doesn't come back at readmission. The biggest one that I see, the last two are the biggest ones that I see. The first one that I think Osman mentioned is the remote patient monitoring. That's the biggest healthcare directive in the recent years, that is to push to reduce the hospitalization and manage the chronic diseases. More and more physicians are using remote patient monitoring to manage the home care patient, to ensure that if they have surgeries done, they have recovering on track, and then leading back to the hospital. So that's what we see a big trend, and they're asking more competitors or more vendors to provide those tools. And the last one, but not least, is this whole cybersecurity. Hospitals and healthcare networks are at the top target for criminal activities, cyber criminal activities and data activities. So to avoid this HIPAA violations, providers are asking us to make sure that whatever the telemedicine solution, telehealth solution that you have in place must be encrypted, must provide confidential data, and must meet the state, federal, and international compliance regulations. So that's the last two are the most biggest ones that we see.
Thanks, Hasnain. Any other comments on that? Any other trends that Sanjeev or Osman you're seeing?
One of the things that you're going to see, and we are starting to see, is more point of care devices coming along, which are being used by the physicians and the patients itself.
Yeah.
That the data is transmitted to the physicians. I mean, whether you look at the wearables or you look at even home health testing like lateral flow devices, etc., you can get that data in real time to the physician, and the physician can determine what next steps to take. And you're starting to see with telehealth, we are also getting into rural communities, which was not possible earlier. So that's another major push which is starting to take place.
Sorry, Sanjeev, we're getting into what, sorry?
We're starting to get into rural communities as well,
Okay.
using telehealth.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there must be some limitations as well. You know, what are the limitations on telemedicine as a US innovator, and what are we finding are the challenges in this, Osman?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, really, we have so much innovation in this space that the limitations are really right now just your imagination, I think. There's so much that we could do in this space that was not even possible a few years ago. You know, as long as we continue to innovate, I think we are going to see a lot of exciting things coming out of here. I think right now there's such a flurry of activity, it's hard to know which partners, which technology you should really work with, because are they going to be outdated or broke, you know, in a few months or years. And so being careful about partnership choices and being careful about technology, especially on the wearable side, I think is very important. And I think some of that standardization, again, I think is going to be key as we get there. I think if you look, for example, at the wearable space, there's so much going on in that space that I think that there's very little I think we cannot do. You know, from a challenge perspective, I think I'm a slightly different space where it's really all about something people are calling tele-home care, which is the applications that are all facing the home environment and home-based care. And it's a little bit more of a challenging space because you may not have the infrastructure that you wanted on the website because it's patient's home. We're using it as an adjunct to home healthcare services. So as you need to do data collection or alerting systems, and some of that infrastructure may not always be possible. So you have to build that into part of your machine. But as I think about, you know, either dollars coming into this space or people coming to this space or products coming to this space, I see very little limitations. And I think the US ingenuity on this side and innovation is really exciting to be in. So I'm very bullish on this space.
Thanks for that, Osman.
One of the other things that I'm seeing is, you know, there's a lot of the traditional investors in the venture community were literally investing in the biotech space or medical devices. And now, and then you had the investors who were investing in the high-tech space, right? They weren't really digital health investors, and they're just starting to come in. And so you do have a lot of challenge in getting funding for a lot of these digital device companies which are addressing the telehealth space. And that's going to take a little bit of education before we get all that funding in place to really push it forward. For the time being, the large corporates like Amazon and Apple and others are jumping in, Samsung and others. But you're going to start to see more of the venture community coming in, and that's going to start pushing the space.
Yeah, I think, Sanjeev, that if you look at, you know, the data behind some of the devices we're producing and the rigor of that data, right now it's not really there. And so it seems like a great idea to do all of this, but you know, what are payers going to say at the end? And so I think that the investor community also thinks about that. You know, where are these dollars going to be recouped, as we mentioned before? Because there's very few rigorous data points. You know, it's teleradiology, telederm, stroke. You know, there's things like that. But when you look at bigger places or other new innovative spaces, you know, I think that is going to be a challenge. And I think it's all of us on the call or listening. I think it's, you know, trying to standardize the approach would be great.
Thank you. If any, I just saw a question come up. Please ask your questions in the comments box. We're going to make time to get as many of those answered at the end as we can. So don't be shy to post some questions for our panelists. Sanjeev, what are the larger trends of telemedicine in global healthcare, and are there any challenges?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question, and it's actually pretty close to my heart. Telemedicine has the possibility of changing rural healthcare. 70% of the world's population lives in rural communities today, or semi-urban areas, and they literally don't have any health care. If you go to Africa, you go to China, you go to India, South Africa, etc., South America, etc. It's a major problem. So telemedicine has the potential to change that. You can get healthcare to people very quickly. The problem is the infrastructure. And what I mean by that is you don't have the networks available in these rural communities. So if you can get that and also look at cybersecurity, right? Because there's a lot of data, personal data, which is being exchanged. So those are going to be key issues. If those can be addressed, I think it would take on, and then you got to bring point of care systems into these rural communities. And that's when you can have the telemedicine really starting to help the rural communities. Because you can have a physician sitting here in the Bay Area, and you can have a patient sitting in the middle of nowhere in Zimbabwe, for example. And now you can have the physician look at that information and tell them what potentially can be done, right? Which was not possible. You can also get second opinions, which was not possible earlier, right, from the best doctors around the globe.
Thanks, Sanjeev. And then Hasnain, coming back to hospitals, what are the key benefits of telemedicine to hospital providers?
I think I want to echo a few of the comments that Sanjeev and Osman mentioned. The first one that comes to my mind is access to care that has been mentioned a few times already, particularly in the underserved communities and those rural geographical areas where there was a clinical shortage. And it also moves the distance and travel time and increases more for more clinicians coming in or be able to serve more patients in these areas. So that would be one benefit. The other one would be it improves the quality of care of delivery. What I mean by that is it's both for patients with medical and mental health conditions. A recent study showed that with telemedicine, patients had decreased 38% fewer hospital admission, about 31% fewer hospital readmission, and about 63% are more likely to spend fewer days in the hospital. So that's the second one. I think the overall benefit that you see with the telehealth, telemedicine is reducing the healthcare cost. And we know it's usually about $4,000 to $16,000 to spend one day in a U.S. hospital. That's huge. So that with the telemedicine, you can increase the efficiency of care, reduce the expenses of caring for patients, and keep them out of the hospital as much as possible. That's the biggest benefit. And then the last one is the whole improvement of engagement. And when I talk about this, the two aspects of this, number one is from the patient's perspective, which is more easier, more convenient, and patient want to stay home, more engaged, not be able to travel. The second one is they love the convenience. I just had an opportunity a few months ago to be able to connect with my doctor. I'm not traveling. I just pick up the phone and I'm FaceTiming with him for 5 minutes. So that's a nice flexibility to have, but also from the provider's perspective too, because right now is the time where it's the most stressful time for the clinicians taking care of the patients in this pandemic. So the telemedicine can also improve the job satisfaction for them, be able to care for these patients from their offices, not bring all the people in and have the PPE and getting prepared for it. And the last one would be for them, from the provider's perspective, it's easier work-life balance for them as well, to be able to manage these patients and be able to using this technology to be able to serve these patients. So that would be 3 to 4 benefits that I would see from telemedicine.
Thanks, Hasnain. I mean, Osman, I'm going to direct the next question at you. I mean, because of the impact of COVID, it has opened the opportunities for reimbursement. How much effort will be put on developing new devices, especially considering a new administration?
Yeah, I think, obviously COVID has been a big game changer, and I think appropriately reimbursement has now been given out for physician interactions virtually. And I think, of course, we'll agree that's the right move. But changes in the larger reimbursement structure in the United States, literally takes an act of Congress. We do need to get advocacy for value payment in this space. And we all think that modern American medicine is changing from a volume-based to a value-based system. And I think telemedicine and medical device is going to provide a lot of value in this space, and we need to make sure that CMS aligns with that, agrees with that, and reimburses us for the work in that space. I do think that it will be independent of the administration that comes in, a permanent, as Sanjeev said, a permanent change to US medicine and likely an impact globally too. And so the reimbursement structures hopefully will continue to align with that. But of course, it is a concern if it does not, or if there's a gap between changes in reimbursement now and where they get to. And I think we all need to continue to advocate for alignment with the group development.
Thanks, Osman, for that one. Sanjeev, I know you touched on this already. How has telemedicine impacted rural health? Perhaps you could talk about any changes that you've seen, or are there any other comments on this?
With telemedicine, we are already starting to see in rural communities, when we take, let's take the example of China. I was there prior to COVID, and I'd already seen PHCs being set up, which are public health checkup centers, which are literally like kiosks. And a patient can go in there and talk to a physician who's sitting at a hospital in the center. In China, they've got a 3-tier structure, A hospitals, AA and AAA rated hospitals. Same thing in places like India, you've got PHCs where the patients can go into these PHCs and talk to the physician out there, and the physician can be sitting in a Beijing hospital or a hospital in Mumbai, and literally the physician can be sitting there and they can literally get the information from the patient and tell them what to do, and that's critical. So the problem is in these countries, there isn't enough infrastructure as far as roads are concerned, or they have to travel long distances. The physicians don't want to go and live in these villages as well. So it's starting to change that. That was already happening. Now with telemedicine coming in and the infrastructure being put in for internet, you're going to start to see a lot more of that. And especially when COVID hit, they're expecting other pandemics to come along down the road, right? And if that happens, you're not going to want to have necessarily the patient come in and be exposed to the viruses, etc. Your staff getting exposed. So if you can literally do that through telemedicine, it works for everyone's benefit. Kaiser actually does that even right now. You can do a phone visit even today, right? Or you could do that pre-COVID. Now with COVID, it's just accelerated the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sanjeev. And I understand that reimbursement for the doctors has changed. Like pre-COVID, when they were doing sort of interfaces via the phone, they weren't getting paid as much per session as they are now,
Right.
Which is evening things up and making it a more attractive option. And then last question, Hasnain, what are the drawbacks of telemedicine?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think everybody talks about the benefits of it, but there are Yeah, I would say there'll be some of the challenges, not the cons, but some of the challenges of telemedicine. I think Osman hit the first one already multiple times, the standardization. And when I talk about standardization, either it's in the reimbursement, it's in the clinical practice, or in the actual data integration would be one challenge that we continue to have. Everybody wants multi-device integration in second location, so in a central location, so the clinician or critical care physician can have a holistic view of what's going on with this patient, from different monitoring devices, from your critical care devices, from the diabetes function that he's talking about. So that's one of the challenges that we face. Remember, the whole concept of telemedicine is based on the infrastructure. So we see a lot of the rural areas, or some other areas now, where because of COVID, everybody's at home, we have poor internet connection. So, and that leads to preventive care. So unfortunately, telemedicine, it does rely on internet connection on both ends. So either a patient or a provider is experiencing the lack of connectivity, or the call quality that impacts your the whole patient experience. So that's another challenge that we face. A lot of our elderly population are not used to using the phones. They want the face-to-face interaction, that relationship they have built for a long time with their primary doctor, and they want to be able to see their doctor in person because they have the relationship. And with telemedicine, you don't feel that. You feel the person came on, you talk for 5 minutes, you're disconnected. So that's another challenge that we see in the elderly population. And how do we change it? That's another challenge we have to face in the medical device community. And the last one is the training and equipment. We have this so sophisticated telemedicine system. I remember when we were working on the CareLink system, it was very, very complex system that requires you to provide training, not only the provider side and the clinician side, to be able to initiate the monitoring, but also on the patient side, be able to provide the data back. So there's training aspect as well on both sides that has been a continuous challenge. So those are the 3 to 4 things that I think about as a challenge, not as cons, but as challenging as we continue to evolve in the telemedicine area.
And to add to that, one of the things that happens is with the elder population, they are too used to doing things a certain way. And for them to learn technology is a challenge in itself, right? And for them to start using new technology, it becomes a problem. You could use it in certain cases, but what about things like, if someone's got dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., right? It becomes a bigger problem. Now that's something you really need to do a face-to-face, or someone needs to be there to help with the telemedicine, because the patient cannot really interact with the physician.
Yeah, I think, Sanjeev, as you were talking about some of these areas in China that you had seen, these sort of PHCs, as you call them, that sort of hub and spoke model is a way to get around some of the elderly population where a lot of the technology is already pre-connected or pre-set up. There's very little for the patient that cannot interact to do. The same in the wearable space, where very little interaction should be required by the patient or consumer, and it should all be automated in the back end, so they don't have to interact as much. And I think that's a place we need to get to.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, guys. We're going to move on to answer a few questions. Now we have a few from the audience. So the first question that we had come through was, do you see security an issue? And then how do you handle patient data security protection issues? Who would like to take this one?
I mean, I think that this is one space where it's in the United States anyway, reasonably standardized with things like HIPAA and high tech and some of the technologies we use to try and protect patient data. But I think it's going to have to continue to innovate, and we're going to have to continue to make sure the patient data is always safe. But it's really a keystone of setting up any telemedicine is to make sure that that is always secure. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about that as well.
Yep. To add to this, I think they're very clear regulations that we have to follow, from the HIPAA regulations to PHI, making sure at the bedside, and if we are doing analysis, we have to protect against the PHI. And then take it to the next level, the infrastructure level. There are technologies out there to make sure they have data encryption across end-to-end different systems. The data is encrypted, so those have to be followed as well. And then take it to the next level, from localization to global. There are also rules in place from the FDA and also other international bodies. We have to protect those and make sure you have the right hosting into different countries, and the data cannot leave the ocean. You have to have the data locally in the environment. So there are regulations in place, and we have to follow those based on in the community and the industry we are in today.
So there's one thing in data security, which, the regulations are there. The one thing that we have to be, the regulations are in contradiction in some countries, where when I go and see a physician, my data is relevant. The physician can talk to me only about it, right? But when you go and see a physician in a place like Africa or India or China, it's really the family which gets involved. It's not just the patient by themselves, right? And so the data is not secured to a person. It needs to be secured to the family, really, because the whole family needs to know about it to be able to make interventions on the patient's behalf, etc. So there's a slight disconnect here, which somehow has got to be dealt with. So we are developing technology based on US regulations, but when you go to these other countries, you run into these issues. Well, we need to have access to that data to show it to the patient's family, and how do you do that, right? So there are issues of that which are being talked about, and they're trying to figure out how to handle that.
Interesting. Thanks, Sanjeev. So technology, works best when it's modified to fit the culture. It sounds like. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. We have another question.
At POC, we were developing the instrument, and we had a patient app where the patient could look and see if she had breast cancer or no. And the family really needed that information, and it was, well, everyone didn't have a smartphone. Somebody else in the family had a smartphone. Now, how do you go about protecting the patient's data security, right? Because it's somebody else looking at that information.
Yeah, I can imagine it can become quite a complex issue, and then it's probably different for different people.
Exactly.
So the next question is, how important is it for patients with chronic conditions, for example, kidney disease, to have equipment that monitors patients and sends this information to providers? Thinking of cardiac monitoring, heart rate, and interfacing with smartphone. Do you see diagnostic and management devices on the horizon for home management of chronic disease states?
Thanks. I think that was from Clay. Hello, Clay. Hope you're doing well. So I think in chronic kidney disease, it's paramount. It's something we talk about all the time. Like we mentioned before, how do you make sure that interaction is not only safe and effective while using the machine, but how do you monitor that patient outside? And I think there's lots of work going on in this space, and probably in all the disease spaces, to monitor patient off device. There are a few on the horizon that are coming. And I think that this is where the wearable space is going to be really exciting in monitoring patients, be that chronic kidney disease, be that COPD, be it for volume management or cardiac management. I think that is going to be integrated into many devices. I think particularly when you get to complex electromechanical devices that are usually institutionalized, like a respirator or a dialysis machine, they're traditionally very challenging to use. And as you work on simplifying those, I think some of these monitoring devices will be adjuncts to those machines. Hasnain, is it anything to say on the respiratory side?
Yeah, it is. A lot of the providers and hospitals that we work with at the IDN level, they ask us to provide their data in real time, but also for their predictive analytics, the provider asked us to provide the data historically in perspective, so they can go back and look at the what if scenarios. So it's very, very common. We get a lot of the data from our ventilator, but also have some partnerships and get some other secondary data. So they want to see the correlation between two different type of data, different devices coming in, and what's the impact of the health outcome. So we see that all the time, not only in our ventilation space, but also in our diagnostic space, where we're taking care of COPD patients, and you see a trend of the patient that came in to a clinic for a PFT test, a pulmonary function test, and how a person has evolved throughout the time into the hospitalization and post-hospitalization home care setup. So we want to see the whole life cycle of that patient through the journey.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of our American chronic conditions, this is going to be where you have to be in the next generation of devices.
Yeah,
I agree.
Okay, excellent. We're perfectly on time. That's all the questions that we have time for. So just to wrap up, we just wanted to say a huge thank you to our panelists today. We really appreciate your time and your insight and expertise on the future of telemedicine. Please do feel free to reach out and connect with our panelists, Osman, Khawar, Sanjeev, Saxena, and Hasnain, Somji. Please reach out and connect with myself, Claire Perry, and Lewis Rooney. And we have one more event scheduled, so that will be in a week from today, so Wednesday the 16th at noon to 1. It's the last in our series. It's the future of data analytics, and we would love for you to join us. So thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day. We really enjoyed
thanks,
having
Claire.
you here.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Lois.
Thanks, guys.